Sairam, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining this weekly satsang, the devotional meeting. You will all agree that it's only Swami's infinite love and immense grace that we have all been able to bring these virtual sessions to all of you. Please join me in thanking Swami with a few moments of prayer. Swami, our most humble, prayerful, and thankful pranams at your lotus feet. Please, Swami, continue to shower your grace, your love, and your protection on all of us today. As you're all aware, nothing pleases our dear Lord more than presenting something in unity. So my humble request to you today is after the speaker session to join all of us in reciting and chanting 21 Sai Gayatris, as well as that will be followed by bhajans. So please gather all your family members, chant the Sai Gayatri loudly, and sing bhajans loudly. Play instruments if you have young children, so that we can then share Swami's love, grace, and his protection with members of our community, the country, the world, all of human and animal kind. Swami says, prayer alone makes life happy and worth living in this universe. As many of you have noticed, we have a live component to our presentation today. We are very thankful to Swami again and we're very fortunate to have a guest speaker. Dr. Ramya Gopinath is an infectious disease specialist from Bethesda, Maryland. She's here with us to present accurate and updated information about the coronavirus, as well as to give us some information about the illness, the pandemic that it has caused and is spreading. Thank you, Ramya, for joining us. Introducing her and the moderator today is Dr. Prerna Satyanarayana. Dr. Prerna is a hospitalist who's currently working at the Northside Hospital in Cumming, Georgia. I'm sure she's already seeing a lot of patients who've been affected by this virus. Prerna is a member, a devotee from the Northeast Atlanta Sai Center. Thank you, Prerna, for joining us. And please take it away.
Saram, thank you Vinny, so much for this. And Saram, to everyone, I welcome you to today's session. I have the honor and privilege of introducing you all to Dr. Ramya Gopinath. Dr. Ramya Gopinath is an infectious disease physician with many years of clinical research experience. She has participated in several international medical camps organized by Satya Sai International Organization and has been faculty for the primary and critical care update conferences in the Satya Sai Hospital in Puttaparthi as well as in Whitefield. Ramya is a member of the Satya Sai Center of South Bethesda, where she has been SSC Guru, SSC Coordinator, and Study Circle Facilitator. Most recently, she has served as a young adult female advisor for Region 2 until December of 2019. Thank you so much, Ramya, for being able to join us today. We really appreciate it. I now hand over the platform to you so we can go ahead and get started.
Sairam, everyone, and thank you, Vinny, thank you, Prerna, and thank you to this wonderful Region 3 team for helping me navigate these technical needs of the hour and for inviting me to share some thoughts with you. I would like to begin by just offering my humble pranams to the Lord of all. As Vinny said, animate, inanimate, animal, human, the Lord of us all, who is guiding us through the situation that we currently find ourselves in. So with that, I will jump right in. So as you know, we are going to be talking today about the topic of the hour, which is coronavirus, also known as SARS-CoV-2. And I will tell you why it's called such in a minute. But we've all been inundated with reports, and I think our lives have really been turned topsy-turvy with this whole pandemic. So hopefully we can try and give you some of the highlights of what is actually going on, what some of the terms mean, and I hope we can actually have an opportunity to answer some questions if you have them. So as you all know, and you must have heard a lot by now, coronavirus is a virus that basically has the picture of an electron micrograph is on the left-hand side of the screen. And basically it's a virus which has crown-like spikes. That's why it's called a corona or crown. And the virus actually uses these spikes that you can see in the micrograph colored in green to actually hold on to the cell and enter the cell. These viruses are found in many species of bats, birds, rodents, cattle, and dogs. And we call it a zoonotic disease because it jumps from animal to human. So the thinking with this virus is that it began as a virus in a bat, which harbors many hundreds of these viruses without apparent problem. And at some point, we think in the area of Wuhan, China, it made the jump from a bat into a human. And once it was in the human, adapted so that our immune system could not handle this virus, and therefore it started making people sick. This virus, SARS-CoV-2, actually belongs to the family of viruses that actually causes the common cold. All of us have had colds. A very common cause of these colds is the coronavirus. It also is a cousin of the virus that caused SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, which many of you will remember from 2003. And another cousin of theirs actually caused MERS, which is the Middle East respiratory syndrome that occurred in 2012. And interestingly, they were all very related. And the current coronavirus causes a disease that has been called coronavirus disease 2019. That's where COVID-19 comes from. So again, as many of you may have heard, a lot of it is thought that this virus made the jump from animals into humans in these places that are called wet markets in China and other areas of Southeast Asia. And these are markets where they have a lot of not only wild and domesticated animals and a variety of meat for sale, where people just come and buy live animals. And the animals are kept in such proximity to each other and to humans that it creates wonderful conditions for a pathogen or a virus like we're talking about here to make the jump from an animal to a human. So the bat, of course, is thought to be where the virus initially was found. And the creature that you see on the bottom half of the slide is something called a pangolin, which I had honestly never heard of before this epidemic began. But it is an animal which is also apparently found in these wet markets. And there's some thinking that that is also, involved in the spread of this disease. So this is, I have a few of these, let me just get this out of the way. I have a few of these sort of graphics that really help to bring home how this virus actually spread across the world. And let me just start this so you can see how quickly and how fast and to what extent it spread. So as I said, it began in Wuhan, China. You can see that it very rapidly spread into North America, across Europe, into South America, Africa, and just literally from December 31st, when the first case was reported, to the present day, which is literally 3 months. We've had, now I made this slide yesterday. It was already 650,000 plus, and it's much more today. So this is something that is really spreading like wildfire across the globe. Let me just, okay. And so this graphic just shows you what's happening here in the United States. Again, this was made yesterday and it's already outdated. You can see that the big hotspot right now is in New York City, where they have almost 60,000 cases. But there are a lot all along the eastern seaboard, in Washington State, California, and now in Louisiana is the next hotspot. Oops. And this just shows you an easier map to look at that actually shows you the numbers that are involved. And as many of you have been hearing, areas like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Texas, Washington, and California have been really hard hit so far. So let's talk about some of the basics of the virus. How is it transmitted? And in this very evocative photograph that you can see on the right side of your screen, it's essentially transmitted human to human by sneezing and coughing. This is actually, these photographs are really useful for us to understand how many droplets and how much material, mucus and so on, saliva, etc., is sprayed into the atmosphere every time we cough or we sneeze. And each of these droplets that you see in this photograph contain literally millions of copies of this virus. And you can see that if somebody gets into the path of this shower of mucus and saliva, then it becomes a very good way for the virus to be transmitted to somebody else. So it can be transmitted by droplets, as you can see. We also think that it does survive for maybe a few hours when, just as an aerosol in the air, and so can be inhaled. The problem is, and I'd like to make this a pretty strong caveat to everything that I'm showing you today, as you know, we're obviously living through this pandemic, and so we are literally finding out new information about this virus on almost a daily basis, sometimes many times daily. There's updates on what's going on. So all of this information is what we know currently, and some of it is subject to change. We think, for example, that people who have been infected with the virus but haven't yet started getting sick can actually have enough virus in their nose and throat and sort of these respiratory passages that they are actually able to pass it on to somebody else even before they know themselves that they are sick. And importantly, it's also, there's been a couple of studies already which show that it can live indeed on surfaces for a period of a few hours. You can see that stainless steel, the average time that it can survive is 5 to 6 hours, plastic 6 to 7 hours. Copper seems to be, seems to inhibit sort of a longer term survival. So it looks like a maximum of 4 hours. But again, one has to bear in mind that all of these estimates are with a particular amount of virus under particularly controlled conditions. We don't know what happens when an enormous amount of virus gets on a particular surface, how long it could last, and what the effects of environmental conditions, such as temperature, are. So who gets COVID-19? Let me just ask you quickly, are you able to see all of my slides, Prerna?
Yes, Vinny. Yes, Ramya, I can.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to make sure. So who gets COVID-19? So I think the important point to remember here is that anyone can, and this very much includes young people. I think this is a very important point that I would like to emphasize, because when the epidemic first started, especially when it first started in China and then spread to South Korea, the initial information that we were getting seemed to indicate that that somehow it seems to be preferentially a disease that older people get, and that young people are not really getting sick. Well, we know from the American experience, and this is being now echoed all across the world, that actually young people do indeed get the infection, and some can get very sick. And more importantly, they can then act as reservoirs to pass it on to other older and maybe more vulnerable people. So in New York, This was again a couple of days ago, so these numbers are already a little outdated. But 54% of patients admitted to hospital in New York with serious disease due to SARS-CoV-2 are between the ages of 18 and 49. And indeed, we have even more recent numbers from Maryland, where a full 59% of those who are in hospital are actually under the age of 60. So what does this mean? This means that that young people need to be as careful about their exposures and who they may be carrying it to as any older people. Now, it is also true that people over the age of 60 are the ones that are most likely to get really sick, so end up on the ventilator, and actually potentially die from this. And we think that's related to the immune system and the way that that gets older too. So people with pre-existing diabetes, those with high blood pressure, heart disease, lung disease, cancer, and those who are on immune therapies are all at, we think, increased risk for serious disease. So what's the incubation period? Well, what is an incubation period? That is actually the time between when you first encounter the virus and you may acquire the infection to the time that you actually start developing symptoms. And we think that for COVID-19, it's a range of between 2 to 14 days. So some of that depends on, the underlying medical state of the person, like what other, conditions they may have going on. Some of it depends on how much virus you're exposed to. So if somebody who is very sick, sneezes directly into your face and you get those billions of virus particles on you, your incubation period may be shorter. There's a lot of variability in that depending on a lot of factors, but usually it's between 4 and 5 days. So what are the symptoms of COVID-19? So typically, and again, you've probably heard a lot about this, fever is pretty common, but I can tell you that from what we know, there's about a third of people who never develop a fever. So it's important not to use that to say that, okay, this person doesn't have it. Dry cough and shortness of breath seem to be uh, very common with this particular infection. And I'll get back to that a little bit later because of the direct viral effects on the air passages and the lungs, people quickly develop the shortness of breath, and that should definitely be an indicator to seek medical attention. Other people may have headache, some people may have diarrhea, sore throat, nausea, fatigue. And severe acute respiratory syndrome, just as happened with SARS, is usually what takes people to the hospital. It's important, though, again, to keep all of this in perspective, because from what we can tell so far, it looks like about 75 to 80% of people actually recover. Now, this also depends on the age group. So people who are over the age of 70, for example, there's a higher proportion of those people that go on to developing severe disease and may have a harder time recovering from this. So a lot of times, people initially, and sometimes still, we hear it from our elected officials. Basically, is COVID-19 just another form of flu? Because we live with flu all the time. We have many thousands of cases every year in the United States with flu, and there's a significant proportion of those who die as well. Well, let's take a look. So how does COVID-19 compare with influenza? So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see some of the features of the flu. So those of you who've had the flu know what I'm talking about when I say it's a sudden onset. It's very common to hear people say, "Oh, doc, I felt like I was hit by a truck. I just got fever and chills and body aches and headache." So it's a very quick onset in 1 to 2 days. It's again spread from person to person by droplets, so sneezing, coughing, talking at a very short distance from each other. And on average, we think that the flu can be spread to one other person. And this is really one of the markers that we use to sort of figure out how infectious or how contagious a particular bacteria or virus is. We know also for the flu that children, particularly under the age of 5, older people pregnant women and those with underlying conditions, such as I talked about in the previous slide, are more at risk for developing severe illness. But with the flu, usually the reason that people have to go to the hospital, if they do, is because they have developed a secondary, what we call bacterial pneumonia, which may need antibiotics. Interestingly, some of those people also develop heart attacks. There's a higher incidence of heart attacks, et cetera, with the flu. There is treatment for the flu. Some of you may have already been treated at some point in your life with these medications or others, Tamiflu, Relenza, etc. And of course, we know that there is an influenza vaccine, and I hope that pretty much everybody who's listening to this gets a yearly flu vaccine because it does protect us. So let's take a look at COVID-19. In contrast to the flu, COVID-19 seems to start just like a common cold, a garden variety cold. The onset is over a few days. You may feel a little sniffly, stuffed up, a little sore throat, and then it progresses from there. The major symptoms, as I talked about, are dry cough, fever, and difficulty breathing. It spreads from person to person through droplets, but we also think that there is a period of time when it persists in the air. And again, we're not totally sure of how significant this part is in terms of its spread. We know that it's much more contagious than the flu. So for example, I told you that there's this kind of number of 1 that we might say with the flu. With COVID-19, we think on average it spreads to 2. For every case, that can spread to 2 or 3 people. So it's much more contagious than the flu. We think that older people, those with underlying conditions, are definitely more susceptible and likely to develop significant and severe disease. Interestingly, we're still not quite sure, because we're still very early in the pandemic, of whether pregnant women are at increased risk. We know they are for the regular flu. We're not quite sure for COVID-19. And in contrast to the flu, the reason that people usually have to go to the hospital, and the reason you've been hearing so much in the news about ventilators, is that they develop what we call acute respiratory distress syndrome that requires supplemental oxygenation. So sometimes you can provide that oxygenation just with these nasal prongs that are stuck in somebody's nose with an oxygen source. Sometimes they are given through a face mask if you need more oxygen, but sometimes even those measures are not enough to keep enough oxygen in your blood, and that's when somebody will need to be on a ventilator. And that's happening quite frequently. About 5% of people who get COVID end up on a ventilator. So that's why there's such a demand and such an outcry about the lack of ventilators. Again, in contrast to the flu, there's no treatment for COVID-19 yet that we know of that works, and there's no vaccine. So what do I do if I think that I have symptoms that might be suggestive of the flu, of COVID-19, sorry? Well, as I just shared with you, some of the initial symptoms just feel exactly like a cold. So do exactly what you would do for a regular cold. You would rest. You might, use some acetaminophen. You might use cold compresses if you have a fever. You would drink a lot of fluids and make sure you were hydrated. Tender, loving care from those around you. And for those of us that, because we have Swami in our lives, we also take vibhuti. Do talk to your doctor. If you are somebody who has chronic medical conditions, you are older, do try to get in touch with your doctor and just get more specific advice that's tailored to your particular situation. Right now, there's been really an explosion of telemedicine capabilities all across. So many of your doctors are probably also doing telemedicine as well. So that's a very good substitute, because you can actually see what the person looks like, and it's much easier to communicate rather than just by phone. Isolate yourself as much as possible from others in the family. Why is this important? Again, because if one person has it, the others may already have been exposed or they may not have. And anything that you can do to protect even other members of your family from actually being exposed to the virus is a useful thing. So use separate glasses to drink any liquids, use separate cutlery, linens, and try and keep yourself, if possible, in a separate room. Now, obviously, this becomes challenging, and it's not always possible, depending on your own circumstances. Perhaps you're a parent of young children. It's really difficult to keep yourself away, but try as much as possible and ask for help if you need it. If when you are having to be in the same environment, such as if you're in the kitchen, you're in the dining room at the same time, and you have symptoms, you should wear a mask to try and prevent some of those droplets that might even get into the air just from talking, and certainly from coughing and sneezing and stuff, from being disseminated widely in the environment. I told you that this virus does exist on surfaces for some period of time. And so if droplets are on a surface, somebody touches it with their hands, and then they touch their face, eyes, mouth, whatever, they can certainly transmit the virus. Caregivers, supposing somebody in your family, or even a child or an older person, has symptoms that are suggestive of this, then if you are taking care of them, do try to wear a mask and even gloves when you're working directly with them, because again, that just prevents the transfer of the infected material. Very important to remember, as I hope I showed you, that if you have shortness of breath, please seek medical advice. See a doctor via telemedicine if you can. If you can't, consider going to an urgent care center, or go to the ER if you're really having trouble, because as I told you, the virus directly affects the cells of the air passages, and sometimes you may need supplemental oxygen. So the recommendations for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, this question came up when I did this presentation in Region 2, and I think it's really important. Again, as with so much, we don't have full information, but I would refer you to this site, the CDC, for the recommendations that exist. And again, for further information, the CDC website or the website of your own state Department of Health are always good to go to. Should I get tested for SARS-CoV-2? I mean, this is a $1 million question. You've heard a lot about it in the news. And honestly, frankly, it's still a moot point in many areas, meaning that even if you have symptoms and you're otherwise doing well, for the most part, it's really hard to get a test. I will say, and going back to the slide where I showed you the difference between flu and COVID-19, don't forget that the flu is still circulating, and so are other seasonal viruses. So it's important, if you're concerned in any way, to try and get some medical opinion or talk with your provider so that they can help to guide you. Because if your symptoms are more in keeping with the flu, for example, then there are treatments available, and the sooner that you start those treatments, the better. Now, ideally, in a very ideal situation, testing would be really important for information, so that whether you're at risk of passing it on to somebody else, or someone else who's been exposed would know that they have been exposed. But unfortunately, we're not yet at the point where testing is so widespread that it's useful for those of us who do not have to go to the hospital. Currently, in most areas, testing requires that you meet certain strict criteria. So, in other words, you've got serious symptoms, but I can tell you that, having just worked with a patient in New Jersey, I can tell you that it's not that easy, even if you have serious symptoms, to go. And I think these are the availability is different in different regions, different states. So I would really urge you to keep in touch on your State Department of Health website and other sources. So if you're a healthcare worker or first responder and you have these symptoms, you can get tested. And certainly residents of long-term care facilities, as you have no doubt heard, it spreads like wildfire, because these are all very vulnerable patients who are in close proximity. Are treatments available? So far yet, we don't have any treatment that's proven or approved. You may have all heard of this antiviral drug that's called remdesivir. And this is actually an antiviral that is undergoing clinical trials at this point. It's also being dispensed for sort of compassionate use at this point, but we don't yet have data on how well it works. Similarly, you've heard a lot of talk about hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, particularly in combination with another common antibiotic, azithromycin. Um, all of the hoopla about this combination came out of a very small study of about 26 patients in France, where maybe there was some evidence that it worked, but actually it is undergoing clinical trials as well, especially in New York and I think a couple of other places in the country. So we hope that given the numbers of patients that are being seen and potentially treated with this, that we may soon have some idea of whether it helps or not. There was some thought that some anti-HIV medications might help, but we don't think so anymore. Other things that modify the immune response of the body are definitely being tried. You've heard, for those of you who follow some of the press briefings and stuff, you've heard Dr. Fauci talk about, plasma from COVID-19 patients who have recovered. And while it is definitely a principle that is used in other infectious diseases, we're still not close. And then there's lots of other, thoughts about things like vitamin C, other anecdotal herbal remedies. There's a lot circulating on WhatsApp and other social media. And I would really urge you to just, look at all of those with a skeptical eye and try to confine your information to places that will give you the best information that has been tested. So what can I do? So I think the first thing and foremost is keep calm and stay at home. And we'll get into this a little bit more because I want to demonstrate to you what the impact of you staying at home is, and we'll get to that. But I think it's also really important. The first part of it is really important too. I think that we are inundated with information. We know that many people are staying home. Schools are out, colleges are out, everything has been canceled. Life as we know it is really upside down. And I think in these situations, it's really easy to sort of focus on all the bad news and forget that we have a lot to be grateful for. So try as much as possible to stay calm. Please have a very skeptical outlook to anything that crosses your path through WhatsApp or other social media. Many people say, well, this definitely helps and that definitely helps. I mean, we don't know what utility some of the herbal remedies might have, but it's very difficult to recommend something that hasn't been fully tested, because the nature of medicine and mankind is that pretty much everything will work for somebody. And so what we're trying to, sort of advocate is things that really work for the large number of people. So just please be careful of what comes across in social media. Hand washing, really simple, but very, very basic and very, very important, because, if you have virus on your hands, you can transmit it to other surfaces, doorknobs, counters. You can transmit it to your loved ones. You can transmit it to other people. So please be very conscious. I think one thing that this epidemic is doing is making us very conscious of how we interact with our environment. There's many good videos for how to wash your hands, 20 seconds. I think when I tried it myself, you can say 2.5 Sai Gayatris in that time, but you can find whatever works for you and make sure that you do it properly. Purell hand sanitizer, that many places are running out. But, soap and water, when done correctly, seems to work just as well. Try to disinfect and keep your surfaces clean in the house, again, because of the potential for picking up virus. And, social distancing. Some of you may be familiar with this very iconic American portrait called American Gothic. And here you see the two people actually wearing masks to social distance. So let's get into some of the terms that you've been hearing in the media and may not completely fully understand. So let's talk about why it is so important to just stay home. You may think you're not doing anything by staying home, but believe me, you are having a positive impact on the epidemic. So let's look at what happens. Let's let's take a look at a hypothetical, virus that's spreading in a hypothetical population of about 200 people. Oh, sorry. That's the next slide. So, let's look at what usually happens if with public health when there's something that is contagious that's spreading. Usually, if a person is tested and found positive, he or she is isolated at home until they recover or until they have passed that infectious period, so that they can't infect other people. When I say isolated, I mean, if possible, they're in a separate room. They wear a mask when they're in general areas. They use different linens and glasses, etc. And if somebody is sick at home and is tested and known to have COVID-19, then their family members should be quarantined. So what does that mean? That means that somebody who's otherwise well also should watch themselves for a period of at least 7, and most places are still recommending 14 days, to see whether they then develop symptoms so that they don't pass it on to other people. And then contact tracing, usually what happens is that if somebody is found to have a contagious disease, we try to find everybody else that they might have been in contact with for for a significant length of time, and place them in quarantine so that they cannot spread it to anybody else. So quarantines, isolation, and contact tracing all work by limiting the number of people that are exposed to an infection. Now, some states that are still, maybe have tens of cases rather than hundreds of cases, should still try to do this, but they are very hampered by the lack of widespread testing. This is all called the process of containment. So what's happening in the US right now? Well, in some regions, especially like I showed you on the map, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Florida, Louisiana, et cetera, we're past the point of case finding and isolation because there are just too many people. The virus is circulating in the community. It's not possible to track down the contacts of everybody. So we have to ensure in other ways that no one can pass an undetected infection to another. So the emphasis is on self-quarantine. If you think or that you have been exposed to somebody with this infection, do the responsible thing and put yourself in quarantine for 14 days so that you don't take the risk of passing it on to somebody else. Self-isolation, if you have symptoms, please be very careful. And this whole concept of social distancing, and this is all called mitigation. So you've heard these terms, these are what they mean. So what can we do to help? So self-quarantine, we've already been through. Self-isolation, if you have symptoms, keep yourself separate so that healthy persons aren't exposed. And social distancing, that means at least 6 feet distance between you and others. So all of the measures that we have seen, schools closing, restaurants and businesses closing, the cancellation of sports event, even staying at home, are all part of distancing. Now, there's been some controversy about the use of the term social distancing versus physical distancing. Really, what we're trying to convey is that there should be physical distances. Obviously, we are very socially connected through these platforms like Zoom and so on. So that's the difference there. So I just want to show you what happens when a respiratory infection is spreading in a community of about 200 people. This is a hypothetical community and a hypothetical virus. You will see that the sick people are in this brown color, the healthy are gray, and the ones that are recovered are in the pink color. So I want you to just watch the animation and see what happens. Okay, let me just... Oh dear. Okay, for some reason this unfortunately is not working, but I will send it out later because you can all, these two simulations here, I don't know why it's not working, unfortunately, but these two simulations are actually really, really useful to really understand the impact of social distancing. So you will see what happens when everybody goes about their business as usual, and you will see what happens when 1 in 8 people are wandering around, and the rest of them stay home. So I will ask the team to send this out to you so that you can see, because it's a very good simulation. It gives you a very clear idea of how social distancing or physical distancing works. So just on the lighter side, here we have just the stuff that we can't do anymore for quite a while. So we can't be in crowds. We want to be really conscious of how often we touch our faces and try to stay away from that. Let's stay away from shaking hands or hugging and go back to our good old namaste. Ignore news and qualified advice. Please be careful of where you're getting your advice, but stay informed because it's necessary. And then here, as you all know, home is now where the heart is, but it's also where the store is, the gym is, the office is, the school is, and the restaurant, et cetera, et cetera. So we, our homes are sort of fulfilling all of these functions right now. So that's the science. And then in just the last 5 minutes, I want to remind you, because we are all Sai devotees here, that we have Swami. So I just gave you this whole, sort of an overall view of what's happening with the coronavirus and COVID-19, what's going on in our society. But I think it's so critical for us in this time to just, it's never been important to remember that we have Swami and to keep our faith really strong and positive. So we have all heard of Swami's miraculous cures and of even dreaded diseases. And as a doctor who's had the real good fortune of actually working and seeing the super specialty hospitals, both in Parthi and Whitefield, I can tell you that I am still somehow most touched by the stories of how Swami actually began his medical mission. And I just want to share a little bit of that with you, because I think these things are important for us to remember as we try to make our way through this situation. So in 1954, Swami actually started the first hospital. As many of you know, he promised his mother that he would provide healthcare. And here is this young, beautiful Swami laying the foundation stone for the first Puttaparthi hospital. On the right-hand side, you can see sort of an aerial view of old Puttaparthi, the way it looked. And where that red arrow is, that is the first hospital. And you may think that it looks nothing like the general hospital, for those of you who have seen it in Prashanti, in Puttaparthi, or even the super specialty hospitals. All of us have seen pictures of these. This was literally a 5-room building that was just built in a line. The center part was the outpatients, where one side saw men, one side saw women. On the side were 2 rooms for women. The first was a labor room, and the second was an inpatient ward that had all of 4 beds. And then on the other side was the men's side. So the first room on the other side was a dispensary where they kept all their medications. And the far room was also an inpatient ward for men, also consisting of 4 beds. And so I use the word dispensary rather loosely, because honestly, this was Puttaparthi in the 1950s. They really didn't have much medication, and medical science itself was not that well advanced. Certainly not in a small village. So they had things like, they had some penicillin, they had some sulfa, but they also had interesting things like Sairam powder, which was essentially made of magnesium sulfate and soda bicarb. And they had another thing that was a tonic, which Swami would apparently keep in his interview room and dispense to anybody who came to him with any health problem. They would all get the same tonic. And of course, the cures with this tonic were so miraculous that people from all the surrounding areas apparently started coming or writing and saying, where can we get this wonderful tonic that cures everything? And then when they ran out of medications, I had the good fortune of being able to speak to one of the old doctors who actually worked in that hospital, Dr. Sunandama, and she used to tell me, she told me that when they ran out of even those medications, they would make their own little balls of dried herbs and vibhuti that they would put together and use to dispense to patients when they came, because they would come wanting something to make them feel better. Why am I telling you all this? Because all of these so-called medications were nothing but a vehicle for Swami's grace. They were really just a means for his grace to flow, which was actually the difference, and the thing that cured everybody was really Swami's grace. And so, this quote here talks about how this is the granddaughter of the first superintendent, Dr. Sita Ramaya, and she says that Swami himself, as we can see in this photograph, would go in and see patients, and he would go every day. He would constantly be helping the doctors. And there are, very relevant for the situation that we find ourselves in today. There are many stories, as some of you may also have read, of how Swami managed epidemics that sort of cropped up in Puttaparthi from time to time. One of the devotees in the South Bethesda Center had the incredible fortune of being the chief engineer in the super specialty hospitals in both Prashanti and Whitefield, directly working under Swami for about 18 years. And he has witnessed some of these firsthand. And he recounts an incident where there was a big mumps outbreak among the children of the school. And the headmistress was very worried because she was running out of places to put these sick children. And, they didn't have the wherewithal to take care of them all properly because they were just being overwhelmed. And she appealed to Swami, and Swami said, "I will come to the hostel." And sure enough, he did. And he asked to be taken to every single room of the hostel. And he just went around everywhere. And when they came back to the foyer, he said, "Have you showed me everything?" And they said, "Yes, Swami." And then he said, "No, you did not show me the terrace." And so, sure enough, there was a space, a terrace, where many of the children would go to study. And he insisted on going up there too and walking around. And of course, once he had, his very presence, his divine presence, acted as the best antiviral around. And sure enough, after that visit, not only did the children start rapidly getting better, but the number of cases started rapidly declining. So some of us, and in this quote, he says, "Give only half the dose because my grace will do the rest." And so some of us in this current situation may wonder to ourselves, why is he not doing this now? We know he can do it. We know he can do it. So why is he not doing it now? And I think that, the short answer is, I don't know. And I don't think any of us know, only Swami does. But what is it that we should focus on as Sai devotees and as citizens in this situation? So I think the first thing that I think of is just trust Swami. Know that he has an idea of what the bigger picture is. Just trust him. This is where, our faith, regardless of the outcome, we have to be able to just hold on to his feet and say, "Swami, we trust you. You are going to take us through this in some fashion, and we know that you will do the best for everybody, even though we cannot see what it is right now." Stay positive. Swami, when asked what his advice would be, and when people were facing difficult times, said that the four strongest words were, "This too shall pass." And there's a very nice story of the boys, the college boys, who did a convocation drama, and he made them, as part of the dialogue, repeat this 4 times with an emphasis on a different word each time. So, "This too shall pass. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. And this too shall pass." And when I've been kind of repeating it, it actually gives you an incredible boost of confidence. So we can use this opportunity to really, stay positive, focus on Swami, focus on the faith, and use that faith to find the strength within, to face whatever situation is brought to us. It's our opportunity to redouble our sadhana, namasmarana, prayer, and to pray for others, pray for the welfare of others all over the world. Some of you may have seen, it was making the rounds on WhatsApp. Somebody forwarded this to me, so some may be interested in this. And it's also an opportunity for us to reflect on how indeed we are all one. We're all facing this together. We are all each other's keepers. We all have to sort of give ourselves strength, reinforce each other's faith, encourage ourselves when we're going through difficult times. And we will get through this because Swami will see us through this. So I'd like to end by, one of my favorite things, no matter how many patients I see, I always remember that when science ends, Swami begins. And he is the one who is in charge of everything. We are in excellent hands. So Jai Sai Ram.
Thank you so much, Ramya, for that very inspiring and educational talk. I think we've really all learned a lot from it. We have some questions from our brothers and sisters in the region. So if you're ready, then we can go ahead and get started with some questions.
Yes, certainly.
Absolutely. So our first thing is that many people are concerned about what they need to do if they get exposed or infected. You've mentioned in your slides that if you have shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, that's when someone who's healthy should present and seek medical attention. What if you have coexisting medical conditions such as diabetes or hypertension, asthma? When should you seek out attention when you have other comorbidities?
Sure. No, that's certainly an important question, and I think the key is that to keep in touch with your provider. I think again, as I mentioned, many clinics, many doctors' offices have got telemedicine capabilities, or at least they are. Calling patients back. Even, most people discourage people with these symptoms from coming to the office, obviously, because of the potential of passing it on to other people. But I think there's a lot of facilities now for telemedicine and so on. And I would really urge anybody who's worried, anybody who has a unique medical situation that they really need to talk to somebody about and need some advice, to really reach out. And you don't have to wait until you're having really severe symptoms, especially if you have underlying conditions. So I think that would be the best advice, to just stay in touch with your doctor.
Absolutely. And our next question is, can one be exposed to the virus if one was around a person who did not show symptoms at that time but tested positive a few weeks later?
Yeah, so that's another good question. So I think um, the current state of our knowledge about this virus seems to indicate that even if you don't have symptoms, you can, in the maybe about 48 hours before you develop symptoms, you have enough virus here so that the secretions that you have, if you sneeze or you cough or something, there's enough virus here that you can actually pass it on to somebody else. So this is obviously of great concern because you don't know that you're sick, so you're not trying to keep yourself away particularly from people, but you can still pass it on. Now I think the questioner asked if they turn positive a few weeks later. Usually speaking, if you recall the incubation period that I told you about, it's usually 2 to 14 days. So if after 14 days that person hasn't developed symptoms, but they develop symptoms like 2 weeks after that period of 14 days, then you probably were not at risk from that person. So I hope that's clear. I think the time frame is very important as well. So in other words, if you are exposed and somebody develops symptoms, let's say 5 days later after you met them, then yes, you probably were exposed to some virus when you were with them 5 days ago, and you may think of wanting to quarantine yourself. If you met somebody and then they develop it like 3 weeks later or a month later, you probably were not at risk from that.
Thank you. That really clarifies, I think, especially with the incubation period. So thank you.
Sure.
So moving on to our next question. There's a lot of speculation that the virus is sensitive to heat. We've gotten a few questions on whether or not there is a benefit to steam inhalation. Can you please give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I mean, in fact, I saw this on WhatsApp too. I think someone forwarded it to me, and I think the short answer is nobody knows actually, because you may have heard also in all the discussions that have been going on through the media that one big point of speculation is what happens when the weather starts getting warmer, like as we head into the summertime. Some people think that okay, maybe the epidemic will calm down by itself because of the heat. Some people are saying we haven't seen it so prominently yet in Africa and South America yet because they are hotter climates, but as they head into their winter, it may ramp up there. The short answer is nobody actually knows. And I know that there has been a lot of speculation that maybe if you inhale steam or you drink warm liquids, et cetera, it might help. I don't think anybody knows. So at this point, I think if it makes you feel symptomatically better in some way, by all means, drink warm water if that agrees with you. But as a therapeutic for this virus, I'm not sure that that can be recommended now.
And of course, with that said, many of us at home want to know what we can do to avoid getting sick.
Yeah.
Are there any foods that you know that could help boost our immunity, or and more specifically, would you recommend taking high dose vitamin C, and if so, what dose?
Yeah. So other also good questions. I mean, I think the role of vitamin C is very interesting because I think it's been sort of in and out of the scientific literature, and I can tell you that in the scientific literature, the opinion is still divided. There are some people who think, oh, it is absolutely necessary, and in fact, there are some places that actually administer it intravenously, vitamin C. There's other places that there's other opinions that feel that it doesn't really do anything. I think, me personally, I think that if you were to take your usual dose of vitamin C, that you get from CVS, it certainly couldn't hurt. I don't know that there's enough evidence to actually recommend that you increase the dose or take more than usual. I don't think there's anything that really can be said by that. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question, Prerna.
Are there any specific foods that
Oh,
you would recommend?
yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I think the issue of food is really interesting because I think our system of medicine, to be honest, doesn't, in some ways it's wonderful for a lot of things, but it doesn't have the level of subtlety to sort of really be able to recommend certain foods. Western medicine is just not very good that way. So there may be foods that would help to boost immunity in some way. I really wouldn't be able to guide you very well regarding that.
Along the same lines, now that we're kind of staying at home much more, and the idea of keeping ourselves as safe as possible, do you feel that there's any use to any handheld UV light to disinfect the incoming mail? Or now that we're not able to go out as shopping, Amazon packages, we're getting a lot more things delivered to our houses. What do you recommend in terms of the mail, Amazon, groceries, things like that to keep ourselves safe?
Yeah. No, this comes up a lot also. I wouldn't, again, be able to comment specifically on the UV light aspect of it. That's certainly, something that is used in different aspects of infection control. But as regards, our current situation, I really couldn't sort of hazard an opinion on that. As far as the other stuff that comes in, as I showed you in one of the slides, it does look like the virus is able to exist on certain surfaces for a period of some hours, maybe longer. Again, I'd like to emphasize that we really don't have really accurate information of how long it can survive. What I showed you in the slides is just the first bits of information that we are starting to gather based on studies. So I think one approach would be so again, there's so many caveats with this because if something is gonna be passed through these mediums, it requires that somebody with virus on their hands touched it, and they touched it within the last 4 to 5 hours, so that the virus is still viable. It depends on how much virus they had on their hands. There's so many variables. But I think as a general sort of blanket rule, just to be safe, you could consider just wiping down things with the household whatever Clorox wipes or something, especially if you have something that's in a cardboard box, you have a plastic container, whatever it is. That would be just a sort of a sort of abundance of caution, not really that we have absolute evidence that it's totally necessary.
And specifically, I think there's one question: what can doctors do to protect their families and minimize bringing the virus home?
No, I mean, I think that is really important and very just a critical piece of it, because I think that we're all sort of talking about social distancing, but many healthcare workers, many other types of workers, first responders, don't have that luxury, and so it really does become an issue. And the only thing that I can say is, I think all of us need to sort of develop a plan for how we're going to manage in house. Have a place that you can sort of have to yourself. I would sort of try to take over, one room of the house, if you're a physician or a healthcare worker, nurse, or respiratory therapist, whatever your role that has contact with patients. I would definitely try to find a room that you can sort of keep to yourself. I would not, sort of really try to keep yourself away from the family. I think, personally speaking, I think just uh, showering, changing whatever clothes you came home with, because we don't know how much lives on those surfaces. If you have any symptoms, you would be somebody who would be able to be tested and should be tested, because I think we're still at the point where most places are still saying for healthcare workers that do have symptoms and are positive, they should be isolated and should not come back to work for X number of days. So definitely all of the precautions that we're talking about should be sort of doubled, tripled for these people, just because of the exposures that they have.
Absolutely. So I know in your slides you had talked about the kind of demographics of the virus, who's more susceptible, who can get it, etc. But it appears that COVID-19 does not affect children in the same way that it affects adults. Can you explain why this is the case? And can children still be carriers and pass it on to other members of the family?
Yeah. No, thank you for that question, Prerna, because I think it's a really important point. One of the things I really did want to emphasize was the fact that anybody, regardless of your age, is susceptible to, getting infected with this virus and developing the infection COVID-19. And that very much includes children. So, we initially, when the first data started coming out of China and then South Korea, it seemed like most of the people who were getting into trouble were the people that were over 60. But we have seen everywhere. And honestly, even in all the, most of the states that we have data for here, we're totally understanding the fact that a full 50% or more, 50 to 60% of people who are hospitalized are actually between the ages of 14 and 60, and often below 50. And specifically about babies, I just want to emphasize the fact that babies are susceptible. So in Maryland, we've had 3-month-olds, we've had 4 months old, we've had 10-month-old babies. So they are susceptible. It may be that the older age group definitely, because as you age, your immune system also ages. So there's definitely an effect of that in terms of who develops serious disease, like who gets on the ventilator, who maybe succumbs to the disease. But it's really not true that anybody can get it. And I think that's important to understand. And it's also important to understand that those children, even if they don't get very serious disease, they might have a cold and they get over it, they can very much pass it on to other people. And so vulnerable people in their household, whether it's older adults with conditions or anybody else, are at risk from contact with them.
And with that, in conjunction to that, are there any specific precautions that parents of younger children have to take? For example, can kids get this virus from the playground or rolling on the grass? Or is it safe for a father and son to play tennis without touching the benches or anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's hard. It's a difficult thing to navigate all of this, and I think that really what we're talking about is anything that brings you in contact with a significant amount of virus. So, for example, if let's say ordinarily a child rolling on the ground may not be such a big thing unless somebody had just sneezed on that very spot, 10 minutes ago or something like that. So these are things that are completely unknown. Like there's no way that you can really protect yourself against these things. What I would say about children is I would say, to be very careful just about the playground equipment. Because again, children are great at passing on things because it's really difficult to get kids to wash their hands, keep it clean, etc. And they touch it and they're all over, they're in their fingers are in their mouth, etc. So I would be, just very suspicious and cautious around playground equipment. I think, children are children. They have a lot of energy, and I think, it's almost necessary to get them and get ourselves out of the house from time to time as much as possible, or not as much as possible, but from time to time, as needed as possible. And I think the key with that, though, is that we can't all then go to the local park and congregate there because that is not physical distancing. So I would just urge, kind of using common sense, remembering that the principles are not to contact any surface that might have a load of virus. So clean it, wear gloves, whatever. And the other thing is not to be, because of the way the virus is transmitted, not to put yourself in close proximity to a lot of people, such as if you congregate in a park or a restaurant or something. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. I think we have a really great question coming up, and that's that since many of us are spending more time at home, how can devotees and citizens with the bubbling enthusiasm to serve still make a difference in the community without endangering themselves or their families?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I think we're all just really anxious to do our part to sort of help, and we keep hearing stories of so many places and people that need help. So I think there's obviously not one answer that fits everybody, but I would say just explore what the options are in your area. So, for example, food banks sometimes need more donations at this time. Maybe you can donate either in kind or anything. I wouldn't sort of really suggest necessarily going and physically volunteering unless you are really careful about the situation and depending on what your medical situation is. I think one of the things that we also we sometimes forget the power of prayer. I think that this is one thing that we can all do regardless of what our medical situations are, regardless of how old we are. And I think that Swami constantly tells us that prayer works, prayer helps. And I think we need to sort of take that at face value and practice namasmarana, practice positivity, practice faith. And I think, just keep in touch with your local areas and see what are necessary. I know that there has been a lot of talk recently about hospitals that might need masks, for example. And I think that there's been a lot of enthusiasm about it. I think correctly, the national committee has put a pause on those activities until they can look into it, because I think part of that also depends on, obviously the last thing that anybody would want to do is we have to sort of be careful about the environment in which this is done. Also, the last thing anybody would want to do is unwittingly, very unwittingly, and really wanting to help, be a medium to spread anything that might be detrimental to the people that use it. So I think they are looking into it, and I think that's the right thing to do.
And of course, I know the last question is going to be more difficult to answer, especially given how things are changing and every day and everything is so fluid. But when do you think kids can go back to school, and when can center activities restart again?
Yeah, I know we're all kind of we all have some version of cabin fever, I'm sure. But I think the short answer to that is it's really hard to put a date on. Nobody really knows exactly, because I think there's so many factors. When is testing? If testing was really widespread, I think potentially we could give a different answer to this, because we could then be really intentional about where the pockets of infection are, who's getting infected. We can really put better interventions in place. But really, because we really don't have that kind of widespread testing, we don't have the antibody testing, which will tell us who's actually encountered the virus and has recovered from it. That's really important information. We don't have that information. And I think that, right now in those slides that I showed you, we're very much in the mitigation part. So we're trying to sort of, keep as many infections from not being spread as possible. And so I think that until we sort of really see those curves of infections coming down, I don't think anybody's going to be recommending anything. Most places, I think, for example, my kids are in college. They have already told them that they're done for the year, and there's some question about the fall semester. I think most public schools are going, month by month. I think in our area they've said at least till May 1st. Beyond that, they'll probably extend it. So I think the short answer is we don't know. One last thing that I just wanted to add to the previous question: what can we do? I think one really important thing is, because we are all social creatures, we're all very used to seeing each other, and we derive a lot of our well-being from those interactions. I would really urge you, if you have the time and the wherewithal, to reach out to other people who may not, who may need a kind word, who may need just a chat, who may need just an inquiry to say, how are you doing? Do you need anything? Can I get you anything? I think that because technology has helped us so much in those ways, I think those are really vital to sort of maintain connections, to make sure that people don't feel like they're on their own when they're trying to get through this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ramya, for today's discussion. I think it was extremely informative, so helpful, and I think it gave us a lot of peace to know what we're seeing, what to expect, and how to help all of us remember that Swami is there at the end of the day. He's there with us.
Yes.
And so I think we're all very grateful to Swami, and as well to our regional officers, for helping us with this opportunity and providing this for us. And thank you, Sister Ramya, again, for providing such great medical facts and answering all these questions by the devotees. And of course, as you mentioned, I think it's important to stay calm and follow the recommended guidelines from the reliable sources. So we really thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Prerna, and thank you to the regional team for inviting me. And good luck and Sairam to all of you. We have the best antiviral agent with us, so we just have to keep strong in our faith.
And again, I just want to thank Jaime and his team for helping coordinate all of this technology-wise. It's really been such a great experience. So I pass it over to Vinny now.
Thank you very much, Prerna, for all you've done too.
Sairam, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ramya, for such a detailed yet such an easy to understand presentation about all the information, busting all the myths, all the rumors out there about COVID-19. Really appreciate it, and strengthening and holding on to our dear Swami's feet to surrender to him and say that, hey, you take care of it, Swami, we are in your hands. What a beautiful presentation. Thank you. And thank you, Prerna, for negotiating through all these questions so smoothly. I'm sure it has helped a lot of our devotees They had a lot of questions, so I thank all the devotees as well for sending in all their questions. I hope we were able to answer those. Lastly, but most importantly, eternal thanks to Swami for making this happen and also for his shower of grace and protection on us. Please join us now for 21 Sai Gayatris as a family, and that'll be followed by bhajans. Thank you all. Jai Sai Ram.
ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्। 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 ॐ साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वप्रचोदयात्।
Keep my eyes ever on your face. Keep me, Baba, keep me. Keep my eyes ever on your face. Keep me, Baba, keep my thoughts ever on your grace. Keep me, Baba, keep me. Keep my thoughts ever on your grace. Keep me, Baba, keep me. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. Keep my mind ever on your feet. Keep me, Baba, keep me. My mind ever on your feet. Keep me, Baba, keep my words ever soft and sweet. Keep me, Baba, ever soft and sweet. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. Keep my eyes on your face. Keep me, Baba, my thoughts ever on your grace. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. I am yours and you are mine. Keep me in your loving light. Keep my mind ever on your feet. Keep me, Baba. Keep my eyes ever on your face. Keep me, Baba, keep me.
शिव हर हे हर शिव हे शिव हर हे नंदलाला श्याम सुंदर नंदलाला नंदलाला श्याम सुंदर नंदलाला श्याम सुंदर नंदलाला कौस्तुभवारी वनमाला धर श्याम नर गोपाला कौस्तुभवारी वनमाला धर कौस्तुभवारी वनमाला धर श्याम नर गोपाला कौस्तुभवारी वनमाला धर राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम 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 राधा माधव मदन गोपाला राधा माधव मदन गोपाला मधुरा नाथ गोपाला परिति नंदन हृदय सुजीवन परिति नंदन हृदय सुजीवन श्यामल मदन गोपाला राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम नंदलाला श्याम सुंदर नंदलाला कौस्तुभवारी वनमाला धर श्याम नर गोपाला राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई मधुरानाथ गोपाला परिमिलंदन हृदय सुजीवन श्यामल मदन गोपाला राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम राधे श्याम राधे श्याम साई श्याम साई श्याम नंदलाला श्याम सुंदर नंदलाला
तेरा स्वीकार करो साईं
दशरथ नंदन श्री रामचंद्र धर्म संघर्ष करो दशरथ नंदन श्री रामचंद्र धर्म संघर्ष करो
शशिवदना श्रीकरा सर्वा प्राणपते स्वामी सर्वा प्राणपते आश्रितकल्पलतीका आश्रितकल्पलतीका आभस्वानः ॐ जय जगदीश माता गुरुदैव हरियन्तयो नीवे स्वामी हरियन्तयो नीवे नाद प्रभु जगन्नाथ नाद प्रभु जगन्नाथ नागेन्द्राश्रय ॐ जय जगदीश रूपमोदसि साई महादेव सत्य साई महादेव मंगलारति मंगलारति अंतर गिरिधार ओम जय जगदीश हरे नारायण नारायण सत्य नारायण 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 सत्य नारायण नारायण सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण सत्य नारायण 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 सत्य नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण सत्य नारायण 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 सत्य नारायण नारायण सत्य नारायण नारायण जय सद्गुरुदेवा शांति 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 समस्तलोका सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोका सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोका सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् अशीमवहु वहिष्ठेमस्ति उष्टास्ति उष्टाहमये शतशाय वहिष्ठायशि नमो तस्सा भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स बुद्धं शरणं गच्छामि धम्मं शरणं गच्छामि संघं शरणं गच्छामि श्मा Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Adonai Echad Adonai Echad. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. La ilaha illallah, Allah, Allah. 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 साईश्वराय विद्महे सत्यदेवाय धीमहि तन्नः सर्वः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। परमं पवित्रं भावाविभूतिं परमं विचित्रं लीलाविभूतिम् आत्मैष्टार्थमोक्षप्रदानं भावाविभूतिम् इदमाश्रयामि। Sacred, holy and supreme is Baba's vibhuti, pouring forth in brilliant stream His way of vibhuti. So auspicious is its mind, it grants liberation. Baba's vibhuti, its power protects. Sai Baba's vibhuti, its power protects me.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Thought for the day. Do not worry that the new year implies dangerous prospects. No danger will befall this world. With sacred feelings and divine thoughts, cultivate the spirit of love within. Learn today to fill your hearts with selfless love and adorn your hands with the ornament of sacrifice. Sacrifice is the jewel for your hands. Truth is the beautiful chain you should wear. Develop the habit of adorning these jewels every day in the new year. Truth is God. Love is God. Righteousness, dharma, is God. When you worship God, practicing these principles every day, He will manifest Himself. Do not doubt this. Be prepared to face challenges with love and broad-mindedness. Befriend God. You are bound to be successful in all your endeavors. Love God wholeheartedly. You will lead a blissful and peaceful life full of enthusiasm. Pray with a broad feeling. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu. May the whole world be happy. Cultivate selfless love and foster peace across all nations. Divine Discourse, March 18th, 1999. Baba.